All right, everybody, it is another edition of the Ludini Rock and Roll Circus Musicians Mastermind. Today, we're going to talk about getting it perfect. Is perfection good? Is it bad? Is it even attainable? What does that even really mean? Welcome, everybody. We've got Carrie J.K. with us, and we have Joe Freeman. And we're just going to jump right in. Practice makes perfect. You hear that type of stuff all the time. How do you, what's the old expression? How do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, get it right, get it perfect. So what does that even mean? Because, according to psychologists, perfectionism is a mental disorder that they treat you for. So let's talk about this. Are we all just deranged musicians? Or is there some validity to this? Now, Carrie, I know you have some thoughts on this. You said Carrie's been preparing for this all week. He's been staying up late, neglecting his other work.
Well, not really.
Not sleeping. The house is going to crap.
I do realize though that by absolute fluke, I have just the right shirt on for this topic. And if I stand up, you'll be able to see the slogan on there. Let's see this.
Only robots need to think in binary. Okay.
Yeah. So, and that sort of like covers a whole lot of things. It's actually one of my songs that bombed, but the concept of it anyway, and it applies to most things. We're talking shades of grey here, isn't it? It's never just a yes or no answer to most things, and there's things to be said with both of them. However, I do not agree that perfection is a thing to be fled from. And switch the word perfectionism for pride in your work. Because you owe it, as an artist or anyone who's expressive, you owe it to your art and whatever it is you're trying to express to make it as good as it possibly can be. You don't want to end up compromising your vision just because you don't have the necessary skills to make it happen. If your vision demands skills that you do not yet have at that point, you get those damn skills. And then you make it exactly as you wanted to. Otherwise, all you've done is you've put out something that's not quite as good as what you wanted. So that's my idea of perfectionism, as I'm going to argue here.
Okay. I don't call that perfectionism. What you described to me, I describe that as excellence. You're striving for excellence. You don't have the skills. You get the skills, or you hire the right people that have the skills to make the thing happen for you. That's, to me, perfectionism is... There's nothing that's perfect. I mean, I was thinking about all the stuff that I love, and some of my friends, like I gave an example. One of my favorite bands, and I think one of the greatest albums of all time, is by this band. It's the Counting Crows, August and Everything After. I think that album is in my opinion, that album is perfect. I love. There's not a bad song on it. I love everything about it. I could count maybe on 3 fingers the number of friends that agree with me. Almost all of my friends hate that band, hate the guy's voice, hate that record, don't want to hear it, think it's terrible. I can't get in. I play Mr. Jones in the duo that I'm in, and it's one of my favorite songs to play. Okay, but I know so many people that think that band is terrible. So I see it as completely, totally, and utterly subjective, and it is what you like and what you are feeling. And I'm sure that the Counting Crows, when they put that record out, they think they did a great record. And a lot of people do agree. A lot of people love that album. I'm one of them. But a lot of people hate that album. It's kind of divisive. So is it perfect or is it shit? You know what I mean? So it depends on your perspective. It depends on what you're trying to do. I don't think, to me, when I hear perfect, you know what they do with like, this is, I don't know if they still do this in the music business, but I like in the heyday of like the big record labels and stuff like that. And I know that they do this with movies and they do this with television commercials and products and stuff like that. They run focus groups. And they never pick the version of the product, commercial or whatever, that is loved. They never pick the one that's hated. They always pick the one that's kind of in the middle. And that is what is considered perfect because it appeals to the most people. So it all depends on what your definition is. Like you were telling us before we started the recording that you're doing this, that you're doing Glenn's Spectre Sound competition. What's it called again, Carrie? What's it
He's
called?
doing oldies but baddies.
Oldies but baddies. You know what I mean? So there's a whole thing right there. Are these songs good? Do they suck? Is it just opinion? I mean, the song you're doing was who's it? Backstreet Boys? I mean, a lot of people feel like song's perfect. How dare you touch it? You know? So like, I think that it's a kind of like, I think you could get yourself in a kind of mental tizzy over is it perfect or not? I don't know. That's my 2 cents.
Well, that's the thing. I mean, everything's perfect for where it is, really, isn't it? And in the case of pop songs like the Backstreet Boys, not my cup of tea, but then it's not for me. The particular song that when I listen to, especially a lot of stuff from that era, it's like they spent $1 million making it something sounded like it cost 50 cents. Because it's like everything's like really stripped back. The simple arrangements, and if like all the money's sort of gone on the clothes and the marketing and none of it's gone on the actual music. But actually, those guys who produced that record are millionaires, and I'm not. Because they knew what they were doing and what the market wanted. And they wanted something that was going to sound good wherever it went, on whatever shitty stereo their customers had, which were basically teenage girls.
Yep. So it's perfect for teenage girls.
Yeah, and like Bob, like they wouldn't bring in Bob Ezrin to produce that because he couldn't do it. It's not what he's about. They would have to have somebody who knows that they can get straight down to the bare emotion that's wanted there to make it non-threatening. You said straight away there about the thing that's not the best, not the worst, but is in the middle. That's non-threatening.
Yeah.
If you've got something that has too much strong emotions, there's going to be somebody that disagrees with it. And in the sort of like art that we like, that strong emotion is sort of what we're in it for. But if your aim is just to move as many units as possible, then it's much better to have that safe place that people will go to and have in their background at the hair salon or whatever it is.
Yeah.
And isn't going to interrupt their life so much. So that's why that's like that. And the other thing is about that, often, say oldies but baddies, but generally the songs aren't the problem. They are very sort of like, I mean, there's nothing high concept there, again, because that's not what's wanted. But there's the other old cliche about extreme metal bands doing ironic cover versions. I hate ironic cover versions. Some of them are maybe funny once. But generally all it is, it just feels lazy. It's like, I know, we'll take something that isn't expected here, and that's the joke. It's us doing this song that's not obviously not our genre.
Give me an example of ironic covers.
Well, to be honest, most of them are sunk without trace. I mean, like, the good ones would be things like Real Big Fish, Take On Me, who actually did something new with the song.
Okay.
But ironic ones would be somebody like, the classic is like, everyone has a version of Barbie Girl, for example. And the joke is, hey, it's us doing Barbie Girl. Great, what else you got?
Oh, okay. So what you're saying is like just like the novelty of the fact that you know. So if I did something like, I'm going to put out a cover of like I'm all about that bass or something like that, that would just be kind of like I would just being kind of silly, you know what I mean? And it would be like, ha ha ha, how cool am I? Or
on the other hand, if you did that song, but your actually dad had something that made it right for you, and you brought a new angle to it, that's more like the Real Big Fish thing, where you are bringing a new angle to it.
I got you. And what about the group? Just to digress for just a half a second, because I think you'll know this band. They were really big on YouTube a couple of years ago. They were jazz, and they would do these amazing, I mean, like jaw dropping versions of like Nirvana and do you know what I'm talking about?
They were called jazz, or that was their style.
That was their style, and they dressed the whole part, and the ladies would have the gowns on and everything.
The thing is, jazz as a genre. That's just entirely in the tradition of the music.
Yeah.
All through jazz, and that's where we got the whole idea of the standard songbook. For one thing, when that in the 30s and 40s, when that was being developed, that was before the era when the singer-songwriter was it. I mean, that really came about in the 60s after Beatles and Stones and Bob Dylan. At that point, people expected artists to be writing their own songs, or at least pretending to. Whereas before that, they were professional songwriters and they're professional singers. And if they happened to mix like Ruddy Guthrie or Billie Holiday, it was remarkable. It wasn't expected.
Okay. So we sort of digress there for a second. Let's get back into this idea of perfection. So we could say that Backstreet Boys thing, for what it was trying to do, was perfect. for what it was trying to do. Is that what you're saying? We could say that.
I guess it was because like I think the particular song I did. I don't think it was one of the number ones, but it was top 10.
Right,
it was a hit. It did make them a ton of money.
But that's not what I'm trying to say. I'm trying to say that like the way that song is put together, the way that it was written, arranged, etc. That is that was perfect the way they did it. For what they were trying to accomplish.
Finger quotes perfect.
Okay, let's put it this way. I'm trying to get at a definition. You're not helping me here. Can we say that perfect is when you accomplish the goal you're trying to accomplish? So, in other words, Motley Crue writes a song like "Shout at the Devil," which is supposed to be which is kind of controversial, kind of naughty. Get people rocking out. Could you say that is perfect because they accomplished all the things that they set out to do with that song? Could we say that that's perfect? Okay.
I think the point of perfectionism is the fact that it's so usually used that for me, perfect is different than perfect for someone else. And you can't actually define what perfect is. And therefore, it depends on how you use perfect and how that is affecting your productivity and the creation of your music. If it's something that you're able to label and it helps you push your music forward, then all power to you. Keep doing it. If it's not, then there are other mindsets you can use to find your perfectionism.
Okay.
So that music may have worked well for that audience in that time. It may sound good to most, but it's hard to label it as perfect.
So I think the definition of what we're arriving at here is basically it's accomplishing the goals you set out to achieve. And just having something that's just right for the job at hand. Like that sort of like Backstreet Boys production was great for the Backstreet Boys for reasons explained, but you wouldn't produce the Sex Pistols or Nirvana that way.
Exactly.
And it would have sounded bad if you did. I mean, I'm going to give an example now of an album which at the time I was disappointed with, or when I listened to, and I felt didn't quite accomplish what it set out to do, and that was Ugly Kid Joe. And,
okay.
And what was that album? Was it an eponymous album that they put out?
It's
the one that had "I Hate Everything About You."
I hate everything about you.
I never liked that song. I never liked the band. So
yeah, well, that album and that band, they were in a way they were kind of trying to do something that they didn't really hit on the formula with properly until about 5 years later, and in that they were trying to do something that was dirty and they were sort of like in between the hair era and the grunge era.
Okay.
So we'd have people like Motley. I mean, I've never been big on Motley Crue either, but at least they pretty much hit what they were aiming at.
Right.
Whereas Ugly Kid Joe were trying to sort of like do something that was dirty and raucous. But then when you listen to the album, it was a bit too accomplished. All the notes were hit just right. All the solos they were doing muso solos. They were doing a lot of progressive elements that worked really well on the metal album. But that was taking away from this whole idea of this sort of like dirty, sneering, ugly kid. Basically, if they'd done it a few years later as a grunge album, they would have hit all the beats. But as it was, they were trying to do that kind of attitude in the muso metal era.
Okay.
It's sort of like it's sort of like if Joe Satriani was in Nirvana. It would it wouldn't have felt right.
Okay, so you don't think it was perfect, or you do?
I don't know, because for that reason, I thought like it was too perfect what they were doing there. It was too accomplished.
I'll admit
what they should have, and like what I wish that producer had done on that time was sort of said, "This is you got these songs, you guys can obviously play. Now stop fucking playing and give us some attitude," because that's what was because that was one example where the technique was getting in the way of the attitude that we're trying to put across.
I'll admit the rest of the album didn't hit the audience correctly compared to the "I Hate Everything About You" song. I loved that song at that time, but I was feeling quite rebellious at that time. And I was trying to get over a point where I was like trying to appease everyone but myself. So,
well, I think
exactly. So the beats they wanted to hit, it was a time for that album. They just didn't make the album they were trying to make.
I want to say though, but I'm going to say this about. I think that song, because Joe, you said something really important. I think that song did exactly what it was supposed to do. right, Joe? Because Joe
Yeah.
was like, I was feeling rebellious. Like when that song would come on, I'd be like, yeah, I hate everything about you. Yeah, you know what I mean? And that was the whole thing about that song for people that, it rang that bell for folks. So it hit those beats. It did it that well, and it was a success. It was successful. But now let me ask you this, because we get into dangerous territory. because somebody's going to put up their hand and say this, so I'm going to say it, playing sort of devil's advocate. If it's not successful, is it not perfect? Can it be perfect but not successful? By successful, I mean like famous. Can it or not? Or can there? Or is there perfect music out there that nobody's heard?
Again, it depends on your goals. I mean, not everything is destined for mainstream acceptance.
See, I'm in a mindset nothing's perfect. Like so I just said with the Ugly Kid Joe thing, it brought out the rebelliousness in me. But the reality was that was also a reflection of the fact that I hated the fact that I was trying to make everyone else happy and that I was trying to be perfect in the first place. So it wasn't them I hated. I didn't hate everything about them. I hated everything about the fact that I was trying to be perfect and the fact that I was trying to appease everyone except for myself. So my vantage point is the fact that nothing's perfect, that you should just do the best you can and really come from an energy and a place of where you are and keep trying and see what hits and what doesn't. What are you trying to achieve with that song? Do your best. You know what I mean? And then making that song the best, I don't know that it's ever best at first. Did you guys ever do a song that you did the very first day? You picked up the guitar, you wrote it all within an hour, you did all the instrumentals, and it was perfect? Or did it grow and did it become something better every time you played?
Both. I mean, there's some stuff that I did early on, and it was like something I was pleased with for ages. And then after a while, I grew out of it or thought, okay, I've definitely moved on from that now. There's other times when I did something and I thought, oh, that was the absolute worst, put it away on the shelf. Then came back to it years later and thought, actually, it's not so bad after all.
Yeah. I think a lot of artists have that. I mean, you would, and I remember growing up reading. We had a great magazine here in the U.S. in the 80s. There was a sort of like counter to Rolling Stone. It was called Musician Magazine, and it was like where Rolling Stone was more like social issues and stuff like that. These guys, this was like they interviewed all the same people, but they talked. Really spent a lot of time on the music, and the audience were more musicians. And so many of those, I mean, I read interviews from everybody from Prince to Billy Joel to Judas Priest to Van Halen, and they all had like things about their albums. They go, I would like to redo that. Or I never really liked the way that sounded. Or you should have heard the other 5 solos that I recorded that I wanted to play, but the producer wouldn't let me put them on, and they wanted this one, and it wasn't my first choice or whatever. I mean, one of the songs that caused a huge division in rock at the time, and nobody remembers this. This is a really, small thing, was Dance the Night Away by Van Halen, because it was a big hit. It was a pop song by like a really heavy rock band, no guitar solo. It's an Eddie Van Halen song, no guitar solo. What's the matter with you people? So, but you would hear, they all told stories of how, I'd like to do this. I mean, Billy Joel said all the time, I hate my voice. I freaking hate it. I can't stand listening to the playback. I don't know why people listen to me. Madonna has said the same thing. So I think that there is a thing with artists where and somebody needs to rein us in and say, okay, no, you sounds really good, dude. You're freaking out over nothing, and I think sometimes we get things in our head. I think it's where perfection can kind of be dangerous, is where we're constantly comparing us, making what's the word? How I want it, when you compare something that you shouldn't compare yourself to, because you're not in the same thing. You know what I mean? It's like a non-congruent comparison. You're comparing, like say you have a voice like Bon Scott from AC/DC, but you want to sing like but you're comparing yourself to Bruce Dickinson from Iron Maiden. Okay, it's like apples and oranges. That's what I'm trying to say. So sometimes we're comparing apples and oranges, and we're holding ourselves to some standard that just isn't even us.
I mean, at least those two are in the same register.
Yeah.
I mean, what I will say about, in a way, Bruce Dickinson did that. because in the night when he left Iron Maiden, and then what was it, 92 that he did that? One of the things he'd been doing was trying to move in a more punky direction, which is probably what Bon Scott was about. He had that dirty voice in the same register. And I think Bruce Dickinson said at the time that he wanted to get away from, and this was the quote, that opera shit.
Yeah.
And the thing was, though, that's kind of what brought him to the dance.
Yeah.
And he was really good at it. And when he was starting to detune notes and just scream stuff out, it was never his strength. It was all right when he'd have that on the edges of things, but when that was the only thing he was doing, it's like you're taking the one thing that you're better at than anyone in the world, and you're saying, I'm not going to do that anymore.
Yeah. Yeah.
I mean, it's interesting that we mentioned Bruce Dickinson. Not Bruce Dickinson, but coming back a little bit to Iron Maiden as a band, because one of the examples I've got here, and there's another one that I'll mention later in reference to another band that does different, but Hallowed Be Thy Name on the Number of the Beast album.
Okay.
A classic, one of the classic tracks of metal. Fantastic song, also a very difficult song to play and sing. And I think on that first album performance on there, the performance was not perfect. And the particular way in which it was not perfect, it was a little bit raced. There was little points of the timing were coming out there, but it didn't matter because it was a classic track, classic song, and that's what made it at that time, and that's what put it at that point. And it's been in their live set consistently ever since. And each time they played it, each time it felt like there was still something not quite right about how they'd done it. I think it was made in England when they did that one. I remember watching it. And on that occasion, it was Nico had to hit this bell and then come over to his hi-hat to keep the beat. But there are opposite ends of his massive kit. So by the time he got from the bell to his hi-hat, he'd missed the beat. And so that had that little bit of imperfection in there as well. And each time for years when I'd seen him do that song live, there'd always be something about it that wasn't quite perfect. Until I think it was about 2003, I think it was a Rock am Ring performance. They played it and I thought, finally, you've done a perfect performance of Hallowed Be Thy Name. And it took them that long from a constant touring and doing that every single night to finally nail that song. But in a way, it's like, had they done that performance on the Number of the Beast album, would it have been the same song? I don't even know.
And how much of that type of thing lends itself to the character of what's being done? I mean, this is where you get into music that is we mentioned Spectre Sound. You can find them on YouTube. Glenn, he's really against program drums and things like that. For this kind of exact reason, it loses the personality. Nobody plays on the beat.
Yeah,
even Ringo, who's a great timekeeper, if you were to literally put some kind of digital thing there and try, you would see that it's a little bit ahead, a little bit behind. But that's what makes it feel good. That's what makes it soulful.
And Iron Maiden as a band, and Martin Farmer Birch, the producer at that point, and his whole thing at that time was all about you just set the band up in the studio and you let them play. He's not going to be doing tape loops or that. I mean, he did drill them. I mean, another of Glenn's stories that he keeps telling on his show was about Bruce Dickinson's scream on Number of the Beast, and he made him do that thing for ages. He wouldn't let him move on until no, it wasn't the scream; it was the build-up to it.
It was the intro. He struggled with the on the behind the music. He says that he struggled with that intro, getting that timing right, and he said they did it over and over and over and over and over. So, but it paid off, and it sounds awesome. And there are, I think there's a place for, we got to nail this because this particular thing, it's not going to work like it does on this other song where we can kind of play around and maybe drop a beat and make it kind of feel like it's intentional. That type of thing has to be, and it's an artistic thing, and only you and the other musicians in the band and your producer and stuff are going to really be able to come make those kind of decisions. You can't you can't slop up the intro to Number of the Beast. It would lose. You'd turn it off. You're like, I don't want to hear this. You know what I mean?
You see, this is another thing. If we're talking about perfectionism, it's knowing when to deploy it.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Because
I like the way you said that.
There's some things that do have to be spot on, and it's so then that other things can be loose around them. Because one of the guys I learned from at college, he used to say that he used to compare it to comedy double acts. Double acts don't have two funny men; they have a funny man and a straight man.
Right.
Because if they have two funny men, then you have chaos, and it's sort of like might be good for a bit, but ultimately you lose a lot of what makes comedy in that the funny man's got nothing to play off because they're both trying to compete with each other.
Watch the Smothers Brothers. That's a perfect example.
Whereas when you've got a straight man, someone whose job it is just to be the foil, who can do the setup and do the main points and the beats, so that the funny man can then come in and work and riff off of him. That's the formula. And if no one's being the straight man, then it's much harder for someone else to then be the fun. I mean, the classic example there was Angus and Malcolm Young.
Yeah.
I mean, like Malcolm Young always said that he always knew that Angus was going to be the showman and the lead guy, so he wasn't going to compete with that. So he did the rhythm stuff and he made it as tight as possible. Yeah. So then Angus could go and do his goose steps down the stage and his solos.
Right, absolutely. That's a great example of that, but know when to deploy perfection, because there are times, and as a musician, as an artist, you're in the studio, it becomes apparent. I mean, I can't really, none of us here can tell you when, but you have to, if you have your ear to it and you're really listening, you're gonna have certain things you're like, nah, that's got to be nailed. We got to nail that. Like everything else in a song, maybe we can kind of like play around with, make it bluesy or whatever. But this X thing right here, like say you have an intro, like the intro to "Carry On Wayward Son" by Kansas. If anybody in that singing those harmonies was off, it would lose everything, because that's what makes that. It's like Anytime by Journey. It's the same thing that, ooh, anytime that you want me. If anybody was off on that, like it's like, ugh, like it would not work at all. So those are areas where you have things like that where it's nail it. Joe, you're not talking. What's up, buddy? Mm-hmm. Throwing it back to Joe.
I just disagree a little bit. I mean, for me, as long as being perfect is helping you grow, like you guys are talking about perfectionism as the perfectionism of your music. And yes, you do have to get music that sounds right, plays right, that has a rhythm to it, that smoothly is transferred to the audience, that sounds good. You know what I mean? And I don't know if I would call that perfect, but as long as that you guys are using perfectionism, perfect in a positive light, that's great. But if Billy Joel would have just not sung because he didn't like his own voice, we would have been all out a lot of great music we grew up with. So if he would have went into the clinical version of perfectionism and not put out that music because he didn't like his own voice, that's bad. You know what I mean?
And that's the kind of thing. I think you make a good point, and that's the kind of thing that can hold you back too. And it's nuanced, which is something that our society isn't really good at right now. It's nuanced. There's it's not black and white. You know what I mean? And what does your shirt say?
Only robots need to think in binary.
That's right. Only robots need to think
in binary. Let the robots do that. Eventually the robots are going to do it anyways. The only way we're going to survive is if we do it our way, which is not perfectionism. It's creating something that really identifies with everyone out there, that has an emotional connection and is the best we can do at the time, which will grow as we move forward. Like even the best guitarist or the best singer day one, when they got up on stage, did not sound like they did at the end of their career. And sometimes I would venture to say at the end of their career wasn't their perfect music.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
And also be aware, guys, and if you're not aware of this already, I think the internet has kind of pulled the curtain down on this. There's a lot of ghosting on your favorite records. There's I follow Tim Pierce on YouTube, and he's coming out every day with did you know I played on this song? No, I didn't know. He's all over Bon Jovi's first album. That's not Richie Sambora. That's Tim Pierce, who's a Dynamite studio musician. He's all over the Goo Goo Dolls and a bunch of tons and tons of Robin Ford and Larry Carlton were on tons of your favorite songs in the 70s and 80s, although they weren't credited. Because, it had to be recorded. They wanted exactly right. They wanted recorded in a timely fashion too. So, a lot of those guys got better as they performed. Like on their first album, maybe they just weren't up to creating that type of precision that you have to have in the studio. So they brought other guys in. And musicians we don't have that luxury, most of us. Most of us didn't have the luxury. I can't, I guess I could hire Tim Pierce to play guitar on my album if I wanted to, but you know what I mean? Like I would think like, no. I'll do it myself, and and then there are the extreme examples, the Milli Vanillis and things like that happened as well. So you got to draw the line? You know what I mean? I think Milli Vanilli would have been better off just to make the music that because it came out and look what happened. It became the most shameful thing in music history.
And as a result of Milli Vanilli, actually, the industry had to, if not change their practices, be a lot more careful about how they hid it.
How not to get caught.
But actually, though, this does bring on something else, and this comes on. You mentioned about Billy Joel's voice and Bob Dylan's the other one that gets mentioned a lot. Yeah. Actually, Bob Dylan's voice isn't my least favourite thing about him. It's that darned harmonica he keeps blowing. But anyway, I digress. When I've trained singers, I always talk about there's two voices that you train. And one of them is your session voice. And your session voice is technically precise so that it can be turned to anything. You make sure that you know how to breathe, how to hit notes, how to get things in tune, how to make sure you've got that dynamics you want, and what you'll have to do to change the tone for the job at hand. So when it needs to be a bit dirtier, when it needs to be a bit more treble, when it needs to be a bit more bassy, and so on. And what you end up with is something that's flexible and usable, but has no actual personality of its own, and that's the point. It's something that you can turn to the job at hand. The other voice you train is your lead voice. And your lead voice is the one that will make traditional singing teachers quit in protest. You take all the things that you shouldn't do, all the imperfections, all the worst aspects of your performance, and you figure out how to turn it into a feature. And the way you do that just takes practice and getting out in front of an audience and finding out what's right for you. And that's why Bob Dylan's gravelly voice isn't a classic technical voice, and that's kind of the point. It's Bob. Nobody else sounds like that, and if someone else sounds like, and if somebody else tries to sound like that, it sounds like a put on because it hasn't come from that organic place. And pretty much every lead voice you could name, even the ones that have that technique behind them, will still have some element to it, some aspect of it, right for the singer concerned. And then you'll have other things that go straight into punk, like sort of the John Lydons, or even straight up into, I was going to say growling and screaming, but even those are much more technically understood now. And people will go into and working out how best to do that. But even then, when that started out, it was just a way to get as far away as possible from that technically perfect session voice and to do something that sounded different.
Were the Sex Pistols perfect?
Absolutely not, and that was the point. But they were perfect for the job at hand.
That's what I was trying to get you to say.
And there was one thing, like when they got rid of Glenn Matlock and replaced him with Sid Vicious. That was a step too far because then they were replacing somebody who could actually play, but was taking it down into the style to somebody who actually couldn't play, and that's not the same thing at all.
Yeah. Well, I mean, I think that this is a nuanced topic. There's a lot to it. It's not a cut and dry sort of thing. And it is, art is subjective, right? I may not like the same kind of movies or that you do. And so I might love something, but because it's not your thing, you might think it sucks, but that's not because it technically sucks. It's that that's just not your thing. Yeah, and it's the same way. I mean, so you don't why something reaches somebody is varied. I mean, even something is popular, maybe reaching people will reach each individual for a different reason. There's a million things, and we don't have time to go over all of them here. From nostalgia to something maybe you're going through at the moment and that song kind of like clicks with it, to the fact you maybe had a bad day at work and that song comes on, you come like, yeah, you know what I mean? It's what I need to hear right now. Or you're out on the highway and you're heading out on vacation and it's a beautiful day and this music is playing and it's just perfect for that, whatever. I mean, it's completely subjective. So I think the one of the rules should be for art would be, did you accomplish what you set out to accomplish with it artistically? Because something I brought up before was, hey, if the song isn't like financially successful, it's not a big hit, is it not perfect? I was trying to bring out the point that like there's other things that have to do with the financial success of a song. I mean, Joe Freeman is the marketing guy in the group here, and he would tell you right now that that there's a million other reasons why something is, somebody can have the right, Joe, somebody can have the greatest coaching program, write the greatest book or whatever, but if they don't got somebody like you helping them market it, that have so it could technically be perfect, but just because you haven't heard it doesn't mean it's not perfect. But I think this definition of, did it accomplish what it set out to do artistically? One of the complaints that like you always read about, and I'm going to go show my age here, that when I would read music reviews when I was young and impressionable, was complaints about bands like Styx and Kansas and stuff like that. A lot of the reviewers felt like, okay, these guys are striving for some big artistic statement, but they never really reach it. They're just a rock and roll band. And then they would say to a band like REO Speedwagon, which was a very simplistic, wrote happy kind of pop song, and say REO is better because they accomplished artistically what they set out to do, which is to write fun poppy rock songs that you could put on your makeout tape with your girlfriend. You know what I mean? Who didn't slow dance to I Can't Fight This Feeling or whatever. You know what I mean? Like those were, they accomplished what they set out to do, where some of these other acts, they were trying to do this kind of reaching for stuff. What's the expression? His reach exceeded his grasp or something like that. And I think that that's something that we kind of need to sort of maybe be aware of as artists. Can you guys talk about that? You know what I mean? I mean, not talking about those bands specifically, but like this idea of like, you're not there and maybe you need to be over here. And I know that's hard to hear for some musicians, right? No?
Well, a band there. Let's, how about The Elders by Kiss?
Okay. Because
that was their concept album. And it was going to be a big, ambitious project. There's going to be an attached movie, and they had this whole story around it. And it was the world without heroes. And people watched it, and they thought, people read the thing, and they thought, Gene Simmons, this is kindergarten level. I wrote a story just like this when I was 7. And this was around the time as well. And the other thing was when Kiss did their 4 solo albums. They'd been much disparaged as well. Even they were what they were. They're interesting historical relics. But Kiss are a band that I don't think anybody has ever rated them as the greatest musically. And I think in their most honest moments, Kiss haven't rated themselves as the most advanced musically. But what they brought to the party, but they did know, again, they know who brought them to the dance. And what they were better at than anybody else was coming up with an image, a concept that you could get into. They wrote songs that were good enough to sell that concept and work great within that concept. And when they worked with a producer like Bob Ezrin, who was able to bring that out, they could produce classics. Nobody really wanted Kiss to make a great artistic statement, because it's not what they're for.
Yeah.
It's not why you're there. And when they tried to, that's why it bombed.
So I think that there is a place for getting out of your wheelhouse and experimenting, but it's just that. You could take a giant crap too. You know what I mean? It could go either. Can you think of anybody who, like another guy who I think did the same thing as Kiss, and it's a completely different genre, and guys are gonna laugh, is Garth Brooks when he did Christopher Gaines. Was that what he called himself? Christopher Gaines? Chris Gaines? Is that what he called himself?
Exactly.
You know what I mean? Something like that. So he came out with this like this alter ego, and everybody was like, this is like, oh my God, this is awful, get back to, the, boot scooting, not boot scooting boogie. What's the song? Friends in Low Places or whatever. Get back to that stuff. We don't want to hear, we don't want to hear this crap. So, but can you think of somebody that stepped outside of their wheelhouse and you went like, oh no, pretty cool. I didn't know you could do that. Can you think of anybody?
And there are examples. You kind of put me on the spot there. But yeah, there are people who've done that. There's a few things. I mean, like we all like to express different things, and we all have different projects on the go. And sometimes, if one gets too big, you kind of end up stuck with it. No one likes being typecast.
So
but no, there are people who've done it. Even when there's musicians who've moved into movies, like when Rob Zombie started making horror movies, no one took him seriously, and pretty much any movie he'd make would get automatically downrated because it was him making them. I mean, it didn't help that all of his movies were remakes of classics, and we thought, like, give us something new, please. But at least now he's kind of at the point now because he's been doing it so long that people actually recognise him as a director.
Joe, what were you going to say?
I have two questions that something you guys just said brought to mind. So if you're a perfectionist and you labeled yourself as that, would you really step outside your wheelhouse if you were like you had been working on something and you're building it up and building it up and building it up and you're continuously like trying to get it perfect? Do you really step over here and do something completely different and still allow yourself to be labeled as a perfectionist?
Well,
I'd venture to say that that's not the case.
Well, if you did, you'd make sure you did everything you could to get to that level with it. Yeah. I mean, more people fail at it than succeed at it. But I mean, one example there, Dwayne Johnson became one of the most successful wrestlers of all time. And then when he moved over to Hollywood, he became super successful at that when he just became an actor. Hulk Hogan never managed that. Hulk Hogan was a dreadful actor. Dwayne Johnson managed it.
But Dwayne Johnson isn't labeled as a perfectionist. Dwayne Johnson went out and he got really good at one thing, got very popular. He has an audience following him, and he tried new things, and those new things work with that audience. And
but they aren't just wrestling fans watching Dwayne Johnson movies.
That's right. I'm not a wrestling fan.
He has a different career now to the guy in WWE.
Yeah, and it's going to be interesting.
But he never labeled himself as a perfectionist. You know what I mean?
I will give you an example of somebody who we take for granted, but this guy changed himself around a lot and was always successful. Was pretty consistently successful. And there's a couple of people now that I think about this. One is David Bowie, who reinvented himself all the time.
Yeah.
In fact, some people say he reinvented himself a little too much because we all have our favorite Bowie period, right? We all do. I mean, if we went around the room, no, I like this. No, I like that. Another guy is Eric Clapton. Eric Clapton kind of comes out as this blues guitar player, and then they kind of creates the sort of, precursor to the Jimi Hendrix thing with Cream. And then he completely leaves all of that behind and becomes this sort of like folky Americana type thing with Delaney and Bonnie, right? And then, and then he's a big pop star with, I Shot the Sheriff and Rock and Roll Heart and these songs. Like when I first heard Eric Clapton, I thought he was a pop artist. I'm not old enough, even though I'm old, to remember the 60s. So to me, he was just this pop guy. I had no idea he was some great guitar guy.
Well, part of that, I think, was label pressure at the time. I mean, in the 1980s.
What I'm saying is he pulled all that off. He had success with all of that. And a lot of his audience, while they were still begging for him, please go back to playing blues guitar again, still stuck with him. I mean, like nobody badmouthed, no guitar players badmouthed Clapton. He was like, no, man, Clapton is God, right? So, and I think he was, and then he had these big ballads in the 90s. He did this acoustic period where like Tears in Heaven and all those songs, If I Could Change the World. Oh, just amazing. He became more of a singer. He became a great singer, which was not one of his strengths in Cream. So I think that you can do it. It's nuanced though. You have to kind of like know what you can, like he is not going to, like he wouldn't do a heavy metal album is what I'm saying. Or he wouldn't have done a punk rock album or something like that. He wouldn't do like a new wave album or a techno record or something like that. But he was able to like kind of like say, well, I'm this blues guy. I wonder if this is kind of like that.
Yeah.
And I can bring some of that in. And now that I did that, well, doing an acoustic thing, well, that's like, why not? I could probably pull that off.
So I mean, there's branching out and there's changing horses in the middle of the stream.
Yeah, but my point was that most perfectionists aren't going to allow themselves to experiment and grow like that out of fear. Now, you can reach a level of greatness in your music, and you're seeing I'm trying to stay away from the word perfect. Okay, so you could reach a level of greatness in your music, but to strive for perfection as a perfectionist usually holds most people back.
I think you're making a great point, because you can constantly be second guessing. Oh, I can make that. Who was it, Carrie? One of the famous movie directors, said, no, there's no movie is ever completed. It's just abandoned. And I think you can say the same thing about songs too, because I think that if left to our own devices, we would sit here in the studio and constantly tweak and constantly change. I could do, so you get to the point where it just doesn't get done. And so where do you draw that line? Enough. It's good.
There are a lot of times when I've done exactly that, because I've always got stuff in my notebook of stuff that I'm going to do down the pike. And there's projects that are coming up, and there's things that are going, and sometimes I have something that I'm working on that's at that, and I do like to make sure that I finish things to a level that I'm happy with, so that I won't have to go back again. But quite often as well, there'll be times when I've got to finish this now, no matter what, because if I don't do it, all this other stuff that I've got waiting won't get done. So there does come a time when you have to just get it done and get it out of there, just so you can move on to other projects.
We're gonna wrap this up here in a couple of minutes, but what I'm going to suggest to the three of us is do a podcast on deadlines, because it can be really beneficial for people like me. I don't have a deadline. I had this buddy in college. He would say, if it wasn't for the night before, I never would have wrote one term paper. So I think that would be a great subject for another podcast. But I think that everybody is making really good points about this, and I hope that everybody in the audience is kind of picking up on that, because it is a kind of complicated kind of situation. And I like who said no. So one of you guys said know when to deploy perfection, and Joe, I believe, said, is striving for perfection helping you grow? So, I think that's a really good question. Like, am I just jerking myself off here with this song, trying to make it perfect and not putting it out because I'm afraid that if I put a song out, people are going to judge me? You got to make sure your head is screwed on straight when you're doing these things too, because you could just end up, jerking around and not really doing anything as well. So, you guys both had really great points about the striving for perfection, helping you grow or not, and know when to deploy it. I really love those two things. Mm-hmm. Any other comments, guys, before we...
One thing you said there, if in doubt, if you've got something you want to put out there and you're not so sure, use an alias. It's the old get. I do this all the time. And one of the reasons why I've had so many names over the years is because it's one of the ways I can get stuff out and feel better about it. And if it bombs, then it was that alias that bombed. It wasn't me.
Just don't do a video where you appear in the video. Nobody will know the difference.
Well, even then, it's like I was still playing a character in the videos. It was just that character.
There you are.
Yeah.
You always play a character, man. Yeah. Well, and I think that what Garth Brooks was going for with that Chris Gaines thing was a kind of cool idea. It didn't work for him, and he's talked about it since then, that there was actually supposed to be a movie that was supposed to come out with him playing this character, and that that movie never happened, and so people were confused and freaked out by it. But kind of like David Bowie becoming Ziggy Stardust for 3 years, things like that. Like it can be, Prince changing his name to a symbol, even though we know that he did that for business reasons. It got people's imaginations going. You know what I mean? It got people thinking of course, Prince, how brilliant is he? He's so above us. He's he has a non-pronounceable name, that was part of the mystique of that. I'm digressing a little bit, but, so there is a time and a place for these different things, but you just have to be careful. You got to use discernment. The other thing I would tell everybody to do is make sure you're working with other people. Like if you guys, like this is one cool thing about joining this group is you have other people to bounce these things off of. So if you're in doubt about something, play it for somebody. Play it for somebody that you respect. This is why it's great to have a guitar coach or vocal coach or a producer or somebody working with you who can say, no, it's really good, but fix this over here. Or like, no, you're done. Stop. No, quit tearing it apart and rebuilding it. It's good, you know. So having some people to bounce ideas off of is a great idea. Final thoughts, Joe Freeman.
As long as you're able to still have fun and experiment, striving for perfection can be a positive thing. But if it is holding you back, if it is driven in any way by fear or worrying about a critic's judgment, now not all critics' judgments are bad. You got to look at them from a third-party site and see if it's helping you or hurting you. Then perfectionism isn't something that you want to continue to achieve, and it's something that you should look for a way to alleviate and switch over to a growth mindset. If you need help with that, there's people to help you with that. But I think, making something great is important. Like, that's what we're all here for. We're here to strive for greatness. I don't know that we're here to strive for perfectionism unless in your mind that's that positive light that you're moving towards.
And Carrie, you want the last word?
Well, so kind of. Let's keep that. Know when to deploy perfectionism.
Okay, guys.
I think we arrived at a good little aphorism there.
I thought that was good, Joe. Good, man. Nice. All right, guys. Carrie, go ahead and give your website and stuff again.
Well, normally I'd say kjkmusic.co.uk, but today I'm going to say mabno.net. mabno.net. And the reason is I have a few articles on there that are about this very topic. So if you look there, you will find them.
Okay. What is it? Spell it again. I'm going to put it in
mabno.net. Make a big noise. It's mabno.net.
Okay. I want to put it in the show notes. Carrie is a fantastic, he's involved with a lot of stuff. And he writes a great blog, and just very, very insightful. So check it out. mabno.net. Check it out, guys. Mm-hmm. And Joe, how do we get a hold of you?
LouLombardiRocks.com is the best way to get a hold of me. Just go in there and the bot will notify me whenever you send a message.
Excellent. And you can find me as well at LouLombardiRocks.com. When the bot pops up, if you need me or Joe, just type Joe or type Lou, whatever. We'll get right with you. Guys, thanks for hanging out, and we'll catch everybody on the next Ludini Rock and Roll Circus Musicians Mastermind.